Okay, a quick little tutorial here on how you might adjust some items. So looking at the pile caps, for example, if I go into my template and I scroll down here to substructure piles, and of course this is the car park template that I've given you to do your cost plan. And again, just to mention that it is just a template. So if you need to add descriptions or adjust some rates, do so based on your experience. Looking at the interlocking piles, you'll see that the piles that are kind of around the perimeter of the basement, that what we call interlocking as such, they're butting up against each other, are to be measured in meters squared. Now, that's not the way I measure them. I only went back to this and noticed that this is the case, and it's a good example of how you might adjust something or add an additional output if need be. The isolated piles, the piles that are below the basement floor and that don't have that pile cap, are measured per meter, and that's essentially the way I measure them. But the interlocking piles, so let's just take a quick look at this and navigate to, we're in our package here, navigate to our piles. So scroll down, I believe they're in structural foundations. Look at the first set of pile caps. In fact, look at a few of the pile caps themselves, or piles. So there's a pile, first one. Just the pile itself is what I'm looking for. Control, click. You guys don't have to do this. I'm just actually showing you an example of how these are interlocking. Okay, so there's a few piles kind of together just to highlight what the issue is here. So these piles are driven, and then on top of that, then we've driven another pile. On top of that, we've driven another pile. So they're overlapping. And we're looking for the perimeter, I guess, the perimeter area, wall area of these, vertical area of these piles from a kind of an ARM4 type description. But that's not the way we measure them. We measure them per their isolated length, the volume of concrete in piles, which I'll need, and then obviously the pile cap, the formwork, and the rebar to the pile cap. So there probably is an additional output that I'll need there, and that is the vertical area of this pile. But of course, the width is 500 millimeters, and that's not necessarily the width I'm looking for. If I want to just click that, I can see from the first one there that the width of that pile is 500 millimeters, or just close to it. And then, but they're interlocking or overlapping each other. And what would the real width be, I guess, from a vertical area perspective? And it looks like it's good to 400 millimeters. So I'll check a few, or spot check a few just to make sure. Mightn't be exactly it. 397. So let's take that. It's 397. 398. So let's take the higher 398 or zero point 0.4, probably if you wanted to round it up. And I've got that for all the, I guess, all the piles depending on their depth. So we need to add in, I suppose, additional output here. So click edit, and I can do this after the fact. And I'm going to scroll down to additional outputs. And quite simply, I'm just going to say vertical. There we go. Just change that over. Meter squared, sorry, capital cost, substructure, then meter squared. Now, this is obviously going to be my depth, my pile. So the depth of the pile times its width, obviously times its count. So it's counting them anyway, depth times width. Now, I don't have a dimension here that I can map that. In fact, I have no more spare dimensions as such, whether it's width or whether I use thickness. And the problem with that is I've already mapped to all the available, let's say, mapped BIM object properties in here. But what I can do is get around that by putting in width, depth times, let's say 0. What did I say? 398 or 0.4 if you want it, but let's keep it somewhat as exact. And then I'm going to click save. So hopefully this will work out for me. So I've added an additional output there, and that additional output should be available for me down there, and it is. So the vertical area of my piles is 2118.55. Okay. Now you might be thinking to yourself, it was there. All I had to do was add an additional output, but I guess it'd be as quick measuring this in 2D, and it's probably worth a check just to see is that correct. So I might just click that show all objects, and then I'm going to spin over here to my sheets and models and click my basement plan. So what I might do is just make sure that's scaled correctly. I think I did scale it, but just to do a little measure distance, click on one side, click on the other. Yep, that's about right. 9299, which is 9, obviously 930. I'm going to go into my takeoff types, and I'm going to add, there's nothing in here because I haven't done any takeoff in this sheet, but I'm going to click vertical. And this is just a spot check, vertical area of piles. And I'm going to measure it per length, not necessarily an area. That's a surface area on plan, linear length, um, times any color, it doesn't matter, times a height, of course. So what I'm looking for is really a wall area as such as an output. I can stick it in my substructure. Again, this is a check. You don't have to do it. Distance, which is essentially what I'm measuring, times height. Now, what's the height? And that default formula is what I'm looking for. What's the height? Well, let's say 8 meters. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is start my takeoff. So let's see what this comes out at. So vertical area, let's measure through the center line here. Go the outside or the inside, but I guess what I'm really looking for is the vertical area through the center. So I'm going to work my way around here. Try get the center as best I can. Doesn't really matter too much um, from a kind of a QS or a quantity perspective. Zoom in a little bit and then work my way around. So you can obviously see that it was quite, it was a lot quicker just adding it as an output rather than having to measure it in 2D. But this is a nice little check for you guys, a little spot check, and you're more than welcome to do this with any other quants as well, just to increase your, I guess, your comfort level with the 3D quants, given the fact that you're probably pretty proficient at this stage. 4 years of college and 5 years experience from a part-time perspective. Now, no, I'm not getting that bang on, but listen, I'm trying to get through it quickly. In terms of the center, I'm working my way around the perimeter. I suppose what's the center line of those interlocking piles, just to see. Now they mightn't all be interlocking these to the exact same, I suppose, overlap. Depends on what happens in site, and that's one thing I suppose worth mentioning from a kind of a QS perspective is piles are so kind of site specific. So just double click. A lot of what you measure doesn't necessarily materialize. It depends on what the, I suppose, site conditions are, soil bearing capacity is. And I can see that my wall area there is coming out at 2,129. So how does that compare as a wall area to, I guess, as a vertical area pile to what I have here in the piles themselves? 2118. Wow, that's pretty near, which is good. Now, the only thing is that on this area here, this is the 2D takeoff is a slight over measurement. Ooh, let me keep the basement plan because clicking back into takeoff over this side here, I believe these ones, the piles that are underneath the ramp that go through here, um, are 6 meters or 5 meters in depth, not 8 meters in depth. So if it's just this section and this section, that would obviously come down and be very close, if not bang on, in terms of the, uh, the total area squared, total vertical area squared. Anyway, that was just a little check just to show you. So I'm happy enough with that. It actually came out very, very near. And if I made that adjustment to the 2D information, you'll see what I mean when I click this. Those piles that are actually aren't click foundations. These ones over here. So when I went around the perimeter, I had defaulted them to 8 meters high when in fact they're only 6 meters or 5 meters high. Whereas this would have picked it up because it would have worked it off the dimension property that's in the actual object property of the pile. So that's fine. I'm happy enough with that. Another little thing to show you here is if I clicked on those piles, click the little three dots, looked at the detail takeoff, click the little arrow here to the left hand side of the steel pile, and I can see that each one of those piles, at least these ones, if I clicked on them, are 6.5, and they're the ones that I was actually talking about that are below the ramp as the ramp comes down here, or if it actually goes up, whichever way you want to look at it. But for the most part, then down the line, then they're 8 meter piles. So if you need to adjust one of them in kind of retrospect, and that's why I'm showing it to you, you can do so by clicking on them, and up here, actually you can't do it in a BIM for some reason. Oh, I thought you could. It looks like it's pulling it off. You can't adjust it. Sorry, you can only do that in the 2D, so don't worry about that. But at least you can see the different sizes of or lengths of piles there. Okay. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is the inventory. So you can right click or click the little three dots and review an inventory. So you can review this in your inventory. So if you click that, up comes, I guess, your inventory in relation to what's in the overall takeoff. I want to group it by, let's say, by classification. So now I want to navigate to what I'm looking for. I guess in this context, I'm looking for substructure. And there's all my quants kind of separated, I guess. So looking at the isolated piles, if I click it, I got 42, and there's the 42 instances. So if I wanted to click one, just to see them, click a number of them, just see them up there. As I click on them and as I select them, it's kind of selecting them there. So those are 5 meters depth. Um, in terms of overall quantity, there's the radius, etc., etc. So there is an adjustment, I believe, that can be made there, although it's more so in the 2D. If you wanted to adjust that, whereas in the 3D stuff, you can't adjust it because it's mapped to a property. So it's right, it's correct. It doesn't necessarily need to be adjusted. So there's a few little things. Adding the vertical area of the piles obviously is useful because you're going to use that in your takeoff. So that's a quick, I guess, 10-minute video just to show you how you might just some figures.